You know how this works. You give us your reading list and we dig in and pull out the stuff that you need to know, right? The insights that really matter for you.
Yeah, consider it like your shortcut to really getting up to speed on a topic. And for you specifically, we are diving into Revolt today.
Yeah, and the really interesting thing here is, we're going to look at the direction that Revolt is taking under Detavio Samuels as CEO.
Uh-huh. You sent over a great interview, by the way, a really in-depth one. And
Yeah.
what we want to do is kind of use that to figure out, how they're changing things up and where they fit in this whole, crazy media landscape we have right now.
Yeah, and, by the end of this, you'll walk away with a good understanding of, not just Revolt's transformation, but also, like, their unique approach to content and creators.
Right.
And this is the important part, like, how some of that might even apply to Urban Pro Weekly, right, your publication. So
Definitely.
we're going for those aha
Mhm.
moments, but without, like, overloading you with information, right?
Absolutely.
So where do we even begin with this?
Well, let's start with like the big picture, Revolt's transformation.
Okay.
They started as like a traditional linear cable channel, but under Samuels, who came in first as COO in June 2020 and then CEO in March 2021,
Yeah.
they've really shifted gears.
Oh, wow. So it sounds like a pretty significant shift. Like initially, I'm guessing, their revenue was all about those affiliate fees from cable providers, right? Your Comcasts, your Verizons.
Yeah, exactly. But now it seems like they're really leaning into advertising and especially digital advertising. And the interview actually mentions that they've seen advertising revenue grow like 6 times since the end of 2020.
6 times. That's massive. What's driving that kind of growth?
I think a big part of it is that they've really gone beyond just selling ad space.
Yeah.
They've created these internal agencies, like one called 6 Zeros.
6 zeros. Interesting.
And they're not just sales teams. They're actually coming up with creative ideas and working with big brands, Fortune 500 companies, to like tailor these ideas to the brand's needs.
So they're almost like a creative agency as well as a media company.
Exactly. And they're leveraging the whole Revolt ecosystem, their platforms, their talent, their content to create these really integrated campaigns.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I mean, the interview gave some really good examples of this branded content in action, right? Like the receipts game show that they did for Walmart.
Oh, yeah, with the celebrities guessing people's jobs based on their receipts.
Right, exactly. And it was all about showcasing, everyday people who are Black and unlimited, which is a really cool concept.
Yeah, and then there's Bet on Black, which is like their version of Shark Tank that they partnered with Target on.
Oh, wow. So they're not just like, slotting brands into existing shows. They're actually creating whole new formats to really meet these specific brand objectives.
Right, and it's really proactive. I mean,
Yeah.
Samuels talks about how they start by understanding a brand's problem, and then they build a solution around that.
It's a problem-first approach, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, you could even think about for Urban Pro Weekly. Well, instead of just focusing on your own content calendar, or waiting for advertisers to come to you, what if you started thinking about the problems that brands targeting the urban market are facing?
I see what you're saying, like identify those challenges and then come up with creative solutions that, address those needs through content.
Exactly. It's about being proactive and really understanding the needs of those brands.
That's a really good point. I'm gonna have to think about that one. Now, let's move on to another area where Revolt is doing some interesting things. Their approach to creators, especially with this creative visionary in residence role.
Yeah, that's a pretty unique concept.
Yeah, I mean, bringing in someone like Pinky Cole Hayes, the founder of Slutty Vegan ATL, for a 6-month term, that's a pretty bold move.
And the idea is that she's there to, help develop new shows, experiences, maybe even products. It's like tapping into this outside creative energy.
Right, and it seems like this focus on creators is kind of baked into their DNA. They're doing co-production deals where they actually invest in upping the production value of content.
Yeah. And they're really big on revenue sharing.
Mm.
Making sure that the creators get the lion's share of the profits.
That's great. And Samuels actually talks about how, historically, Black creators haven't always benefited financially from their work.
Right. He brings up the music industry as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Artists losing control of their master recordings.
Yeah, that's a classic example.
And it seems like Revolt is trying to build a different model.
Mm-hmm.
One where creators are really empowered.
That's awesome. And it's not just about established creators either. They're also willing to work with people who maybe have a great idea and a strong following, but they don't have the resources to actually produce high quality content.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that in a lot of their partnership agreements, the creator actually keeps ownership of their intellectual property.
Oh, wow. So it's not like work for hire.
Right. Even if the partnership ends, the IP often reverts back to the creator.
That's huge. And this is making me think, you know, for Urban Pro Weekly, like, how can we cultivate those kinds of relationships?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Like, could we create a platform or a program that specifically supports emerging creators in the urban space? You know, maybe a residency program or some kind of collaborative initiative.
I think that's a great idea. Something where you're not just offering exposure, but you're also providing resources and a fair share of the revenue.
Exactly. It's about finding those unique voices, those compelling ideas, and helping them reach a wider audience.
Right, and Revolt's model provides a really interesting framework for thinking about how to do that.
Definitely. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit now and talk about how Revolt sees itself within the larger media landscape, which Samuels describes as kind of a chaotic moment.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty accurate description. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got digital disrupting everything from radio to print. The pandemic really shook things up for industries like movie theaters.
Yeah, and then you've got streaming services, upending the traditional cable and digital models.
Right, and a lot of those streaming services are still trying to figure out how to actually make money.
It's a really turbulent time. So, how is Revolt navigating all of this?
Well, they've laid out this vision for what they call the new era of entertainment. And it's based on three key things: discovery, ubiquity, and creators and influencers.
Okay, let's break that down. So, discovery, what do they mean by that?
Well, Samuels basically says that social media is now the main way that people discover content.
So, that's a pretty big statement.
Yeah, and it's something that Urban Pro Weekly should be thinking about too. How strong is your social media strategy?
That's a good point. We're definitely working on it.
Because it's not just about having a presence on those platforms, it's about really using them as engines for content discovery.
Right. Okay, so then there's ubiquity. What's that all about?
Well, it's the idea that you need to be everywhere your audience is. You can't just be on one platform.
So it's about meeting the audience where they are?
Exactly. Samuels calls it shoot once for multiple expressions, meaning you create content that can live on different platforms.
And they're doing that themselves, right? Like the talk show Keisha Please is on Twitter and YouTube and Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, and they're moving away from linear exclusivity. Even if some content is still on cable, they're making sure it's also available elsewhere.
It's about reaching the audience wherever they are. Okay, so then the third pillar, creators and influencers, that seems to tie back into everything we were talking about earlier.
It does, and Samuels makes this really interesting point. He says that individual creators often have bigger and more engaged followings than entire TV networks.
Oh, wow. That's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, it really speaks to the power of these creators. And Revolt gets that they're not just content producers, they're also distribution channels.
That's a really important shift in thinking.
It is. And Samuels also talks about the importance of stopping power. In this world where there's so much content out there, yours needs to be good enough to make people stop and pay attention.
So it's not just about being everywhere, it's about creating content that really resonates.
Exactly. Content that people will actually share and talk about.
So for Urban Pro Weekly, this means we need to be thinking about how to partner with those influential voices, how to create content that really stands out.
Right. And it's not just about having a social media presence. It's about having a multi-platform distribution strategy.
Okay, so we've talked about the business side of things, but what about the bigger picture? Revolt's mission and values. It seems like they're trying to do more than just make money.
Yeah, definitely. Samuels talks about how they see themselves as an engine for transformative change in the Black community.
That's a pretty ambitious goal.
It is.
Yeah.
And they're actually putting their money where their mouth is. They're redistributing company shares to their employees.
Oh, wow. So they're literally making their employees owners.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He uses a great phrase, renters to owners, to describe it.
I love that. And it's not just about symbolism either. It's about creating real wealth within the Black community.
Right. And for the future, they're aiming to become a unicorn, a billion-dollar company with a potential IPO or sale.
So,
But Samuels emphasizes that they want to protect the soul of the brand, even if they do sell.
that's really important to them.
It is. And they even mention Ben and Jerry's as an example, how they maintain their values after being acquired by Unilever.
That's a good comparison. And what about their stance on political influence? That seems interesting too.
Yeah, they're not trying to push a specific agenda.
Which is refreshing.
It is. They're more about empowering Black people with information from multiple perspectives so they can make their own informed decisions.
So it's about education and voter registration?
Exactly. It's about giving people the tools to participate in the political process.
Okay, so finally the interview touches on advice for creators, which is relevant to Urban Pro Weekly.
Definitely for established creators and publishers.
Mm-hmm.
Samuel says Revolt can offer higher CPMs. because they have these direct relationships with
So
advertisers.
that's a good incentive.
And if you have a show idea, they actually have a formal pitch process.
Oh, cool. So they're open to new ideas?
They are. And even if you don't have a fully formed concept, if you're talented and you have a following, they're willing to talk.
That's great. So what are they looking for in a potential partner?
Well, they want people with a unique point of view,
Hmm.
something that will stand out. And obviously, they want people who can actually attract an audience.
Makes sense. So again, this makes me think about Urban Pro Weekly. How can we find and nurture those emerging creators? How can we be a platform for them?
Yeah, could you create your own pitch portal or some kind of incubator program?
It's a good idea. Maybe we could offer mentorship or workshops, help people develop their ideas and build their audience.
I think that would be really valuable.
Okay, so to wrap things up, our deep dive into Revolt has revealed a company that's really pushing the boundaries. They've transformed their business model, they're committed to empowering Black creators, and they have a very clear vision for the future of media.
And for you, our listener, and for Urban Pro Weekly, there's a lot to learn from Revolt's example. Their focus on proactive solutions, their dedication to fair partnerships, their embrace of multi-platform distribution.
And the fact that they're not just a media company, they're a movement.
Exactly.
So here's a final thought for you. How can Urban Pro Weekly take some of these lessons and apply them to your own work? Particularly when it comes to empowering creators and expanding your reach across different platforms.
It's about thinking long-term and realizing that you have the potential to create real change within your community.
And who knows, maybe Urban Pro Weekly could even become a unicorn someday.
It's definitely possible.
So keep an eye on Revolt and keep thinking about how you can apply these insights to your own journey.
And remember, it's not just about delivering information. It's about making a difference.
That's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive. See you then.